Welcome to the Great Divorce Podcast, hosted by divorce financial analyst and retirement planning counselor Andrew Hatherley. Join Andrew and guest experts as they help late life divorcees build the financial and mental foundation for a meaningful future. There is life after divorce. Now, on to the show.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Great Divorce Podcast. The field of divorce coaching is largely dominated by women, and perhaps we'll get into why that is in our conversation today with James Traub, one of the few male divorce coaches I've come across. James is a CDC-certified divorce coach who helps men and women navigate divorce with clarity and purpose, combining professional training with insights from his experience as a child of divorced parents. James guides his clients toward their best possible divorce, preserving family relationships while creating positive long-term outcomes. Good morning, James. Welcome to the Great Divorce Podcast.
Good morning, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
Very happy to have you here today. Hey, James, in preparing for this conversation, I see that you have a background as an analytic chemist. I'd really like to hear more about that. First of all, what does an analytic chemist do? And how does an analytic chemist come to be a divorce coach?
Yeah, it's not a typical career path, and I've been a bit surprised myself how this has all played out over time. But an analytical chemist focuses on the measurement of things, and I spent 15 years working in the dietary supplement and herbal medicines manufacturing and testing space. So initially responsible, working in the laboratory, lab coat, goggles, actually doing chemistry in the lab, measuring things, making sure products had in them what was supposed to be in them, and then eventually progressed into quality assurance, which was much more of a management function, overseeing the entire manufacturing process to make sure that the products were made according to specification time after time.
I see a pocket protector loaded up with Bic pens.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and a large fancy calculator with a lot of buttons.
Oh yeah, no, those calculators are intimidating even to me as a financial advisor. So
yeah, it's been an interesting background actually to have coming now into the divorce space, because in that prior role, my focus was always, how do you develop a process that has consistently good outcomes, right? A nice, reliable, positive outcome every time. And as I learned more and more about divorce, when I went through the divorce coaching certification process, I saw an experience that seemed to deliver consistently, I'll call them bad, right, or challenging or unfortunate outcomes. And so I got really curious to look at divorce through this quality lens and ask this question of what is it that's going on that leads so many people to have horror stories of going through divorce?
Yeah, I call it the divorce industrial complex. And I think what you're referring to is a typically litigious route where people embark upon divorce, and the first thing they do is call an attorney out of the yellow pages, or perhaps somebody they've seen on TV or whatever, and without understanding the various processes involved. And I thought it was key that you mentioned the word processes, because there are so many different ways to get divorced. And I'm a big believer, and wonder if this corresponds to what you've seen, is that, there's a saying in the divorce world that the divorce world sees good people on their worst behavior, whereas the criminal justice system might see bad people on their best behavior, suit and tie, yes, judge, that sort of thing. But you throw people in the litigious system, and many attorneys, unfortunately, can throw fuel on the fire, and ultimately it can deteriorate. Whereas a more amicable or collaborative or settlement-minded process can see people be more cooperative towards getting it done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you've got those challenges by that external process of getting involved with the courts and getting involved with adversarial kind of legal processes, there's also a lot that goes on internally at the emotional level for people too, right? And one of the things that I saw that led to consistently poor kind of outcomes is that many people will go through the entire divorce process in a state of overwhelm and fear. And knowing what we know these days about how the human brain works, when we are fearful and scared and our nervous system is activated, we actually have difficulty taking in information, understanding and using that information and then making good long-term decisions. And so this is actually one of those areas where a divorce coach can be so helpful when the stress level is really high. Because when your stress level is high, it's difficult to work effectively with your financial professionals, your legal professionals. Whereas if you can come down to a place of feeling really grounded and centered in yourself, good or better decisions will be made from that place. And that's
Yeah.
something that needs to happen again and again and again over the months of a divorce process playing out.
Yeah, it's the quote the term I like to use is divorce brain, and
Mhm.
when we're suffering from divorce brain, we rarely make very good financial decisions. Um, I want to, before we advance too much further, James, I'm interested because I know a lot of our listeners are probably wondering what's the distinction between a divorce coach and a therapist with regards to the mindset and an emotional uh, involvement or approach here.
For sure. Yeah, this is a very common question. And I like to say that coaching in any of its forms, with divorce coaching just being one of those forms, kind of follows the same framework of starting with where you are today and looking at where you want to end up at some point in the future, identifying the obstacles that are in between where you are and where you want to go. And then the whole coaching process is how do we navigate around or through or under those obstacles to get you to the place that you're wanting to end up. And so, by its very nature, coaching is very tactical. And oftentimes, especially at the beginning of the divorce process, I'm asking people, what's on your plate this week? Right? What do you need to learn or know this week? What conversations do you need to have this week? What decisions do you feel like you need to make this week? And so, coaching is always about taking these next couple of steps. Whereas therapy is rarely about that sort of tactical move forward support. It's primarily about like what's getting in the way from an internal standpoint in allowing you to move forward in your life. And so they can both be tremendously useful because sometimes when I'm coaching with clients, I'll find that they have an emotional response to something that's going on that makes it very, very difficult for them to even hear me or to engage in the coaching conversation. And so there's really an opportunity for both types of support. It just depends what an individual is actually facing right now, whether they're needing to move forward or whether they've got internal hangups that make moving forward feel impossible.
You know, divorce coaches, well, let me backtrack a second. An analytical chemist, that strikes me like engineers, maybe it's a similar sort of mindset that would do that sort of work. That's typically, correct me if I'm wrong, a very male dominated profession.
Mhm.
And I don't know the stats, maybe you do, but I mentioned at the outset, most of my interaction with divorce coaches, they've been female. And would you say that the vast majority of divorce coaches probably are female?
Just from what I saw in my cohort as I went through the certification program, there were about 50 of us and there were 4 men.
Wow.
Yeah, so less than
Wow.
10%.
So, okay. So I can trust my instincts on this one. Um, Now, I have some theories as to why that's the case, and it's not particularly brilliant theory, but in my experience, if you look at careers such as engineering and chemistry, the psychologists would say that men tend to gravitate more towards professions that deal with things, and women tend to gravitate more to professions such as nursing, for instance, or teaching, or divorce coaching that are more oriented towards women. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that makes sense to me because men tend to be drawn to solving problems, right? And to the degree that I can interact with things and understand them and organize them and kind of solve that problem and move on to the next thing, and if I can do that efficiently, that's something that feels very rewarding to men. Oftentimes, working with human beings and emotions, and then especially relationships, rarely lends itself to simple solutions or even quick solutions, right? It can be much stickier to navigate that terrain.
What you say about men tend to be oriented towards solving problems. I mean, that's so typical in male female dynamics. I mean, my wife will vent about something, and of course, as a typical male, will immediately move into problem solving mode when I just need to listen to her vent.
Right. Well, and this is also one of the big differences between a lot of the paid professionals that are involved in divorce and then also a therapist or a coach, where this would be one of the areas where they're similar, which is really about empowering their clients to make decisions and to move forward rather than telling them what to do. Because you're going to get very professional guidance on what you should be doing or what would be in your best long-term interest from the financial professionals, from the legal professionals. Whereas your coach and your therapist is going to be a bit more reflective in asking you to kind of clarify for yourself what it is that you want to move in the direction of, and then how to do that.
So James, from what I'm gathering from, the research that I've done prior to our conversation and just chatting with you here, is that it would seem to me that you would be particularly suitable or well suited, let's say, to working with men in divorce. Um, would you say that's your specialization? I mean, I understand that you work with women as well, but perhaps you could talk a little bit about working with men specifically, because I think this is an underserved category, both in terms of the coaches available, and maybe that's a reason why maybe men don't seek divorce coaches as much as women do. I think that's probably the case. A, would you agree with that? And B, perhaps we could chat a little bit about the unique challenges that men go through in your divorce work.
For sure. Yeah. And I think this actually dovetails into what we just spoke about with men being very focused on how do I solve the problem, right? What I have seen and what I have heard from a lot of other attorneys as well is that men will frequently show up in the divorce process wondering what needs to be done to get through this process. And yet, what actually got me into becoming a certified divorce coach was my participation in men's groups and men's retreats, and seeing in those environments just how shattered a lot of men were as a result of a bad breakup or the result of a divorce, right? Where they were being more vulnerable in those contexts and sharing that their sense of identity as a father or the leader of the family was kind of gone, or that after so many years of feeling really criticized and judged in their relationship, that their self-confidence and their self-worth was kind of missing, or grappling with the fact that they couldn't necessarily protect their children every day of the week, that for half of the time their children would be in a different household around people that they may not have necessarily approved of, right?
Yeah.
And so I got an insight into really the emotional and in some cases like existential concerns that men had. And men are dealing with all of these emotions as they go through the divorce process, but many of them are either not acknowledging them or not seeking support and potentially dealing with it on the back end. Once they've solved the problem of getting through the divorce process, now in a way it's kind of time to crumble and then hopefully to rebuild and move successfully into the next chapter.
So do you work with men in that next chapter as well?
Primarily, I'm focused on the early stages, but again, I know that there's a lot of need there, and that was what initially got me interested in this space in the first place.
You know, there's a lot of talk in the divorce world, rightly so, about the economic penalty that women typically face in divorce, and that should not be minimized. I mean, good academic research has been done showing that women experience an average of 45% decline in their standard of living measured by income to needs ratio, whereas men's drops out there, 21%. And both men and women roughly experience a 50% drop in wealth or net worth. But for men, a lot of research has shown that we do tend to suffer larger health declines, lower subjective well-being overall, elevated mortality, higher suicide rates, and a lot of this stems from loneliness or isolation. And we all know money is important, but I think Harvard's done a study. It's a study of well-being over the course of the last 80, 90 years, which has shown ultimately more important than money, more important than working out. Both are important, but the most important is relationships and connectivity with other people. And men suffer a social isolation, So do women. I don't mean to minimize, but to relatively speaking, tend to suffer a greater social isolation. And I think you pointed that to that partly because men don't reach out as much. Men don't make friends as easily with other men as women tend to do. They tend not to share the vulnerabilities uh, as much. I wonder, in your experiences, how can men be encouraged to avail themselves of services they may not even know they need or may not be temperamentally inclined to welcome?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, right? And this is an important topic as well. And I oftentimes will remind my clients that when we think about stress, I can really break it up into two categories. There's the stress that's inherent to the situations that we find ourselves in, right? And that can't necessarily be changed. And then there's the stress that we end up creating for ourselves on top of what already exists. And I think that this is where a lot of men really get pulled down when relationships come to an end or when something like divorce happens, is that there can be a perceived sense of failure. And like all of us, we end up developing stories around why certain things happened. And for many men, if they don't really understand like what they did wrong, right? Or if after all of these years of hearing some criticism about them, that they may have internalized that into their story, they can end up creating a tremendous amount of stress of maybe I'm not good enough, maybe I'm not worthy of love, right? Maybe I won't find love again, maybe I'm not a good father. And without engaging external support to identify some of these stories, which are oftentimes unconscious, we will take on more and more stress. We will ruminate on it, our self-worth and kind of our self-confidence will go down, and then we'll feel constrained in other areas of life. Where if I'm feeling insecure and like I'm not a great guy, I may not be showing up at work as a leader, right? As assertively or as confidently as I could. And men will sometimes recognize that things just aren't clicking in their life anymore. But again, not necessarily realizing where that's coming from or what they can do to start to move through that. And it's really, really important to explore some of that. And I think women, because they are more likely to engage in therapy, especially, these stories will come to the surface. They can talk those through with a therapist. They can adopt more helpful stories and then move forward in those relationships. Because men don't do that professionally, and we rarely even do that work with other men,
Right.
we oftentimes will just internalize these stories for sometimes decades and just really shoulder a lot of that stress, which ultimately catches up with us in terms of physical health issues or mental health issues.
You mentioned the criticism, and I think the idea of failing at something that strikes very hard at men's core.
Hmm.
And something that I've come across recently, and I know I went through this going through my divorce, is the feeling that your significant other is not happy. And I think a lot of men kind of really take that personally if the criticism and the sense that they're not making the other, and I imagine this is the same for women too, but I don't know if it's different for men or not, and I don't know in your work if you noticed that, but it seems to me that that's kind of like the death dagger is if your wife's saying, why did I marry you, or I'm not happy, then that can strike pretty deep and throw a mortal blow to the relationship and the psyche going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that I actually talk about a lot, in the men's group or the men's work kind of space, is there's a lot of feelings of shame, right? Like shame is oftentimes our response to feeling like I, as a unique person, am somehow not good enough. I am somehow bad. And this is, the opportunity for a lot of men is to actually understand what's been going on that's leading to the dissatisfaction that your partner has. Because when you understand like what's causing the dissatisfaction, again, you can start to organize, create a plan, and then to improve things. But if it's just that like I'm bad and I feel shame around that, that's tremendously heavy because like how do I fix that?
So in visiting your website and reading some of your material, there's possibly a light at the beginning of the tunnel here. If you get involved with the couple or your clients early on, I don't know if you work with couples or whether it's always individuals, but let's say the people are at the early stages and maybe they haven't even filed for divorce. Can you do some work bringing these issues to light in the marriage so that maybe the divorce doesn't even happen?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And I've had a couple of experiences of that with men just in the last couple of months where they found me really at the brink of separation, where these men were at the point of like, I cannot stay in this relationship for one more day. I can't imagine being in this relationship in a month, let alone 3 months or 6 months. I need out, and I need out now. I can't relax at home. I'm stressed out at work, and it just doesn't seem like things are getting any better. So both of them were very confident that the relationship could not be salvaged, and yet they didn't want to walk away. Both of them had children at home. Both of them had many beautiful things that they had built with their partner, but they just knew because of either their mental health or their physical health that they could not stay in those situations any longer. And it wasn't that these individuals wanted to leave their partners, it was that they could see no path forward. And a lot of divorces are the result of simply feeling like there's no more options. When one individual says, look, I have tried everything under the sun that I can even think of trying to save this relationship, and it's not working, it's either up to you to change now or I'm out, right? And those sort of ultimatums rarely work, tends to cause a lot of defensiveness, and there is always something new to try. And so I get really excited to engage with people in this state of stuckness or ambivalence around, I know I can't stay, but I also don't want to leave. Because I can equip them with a lot of different opportunities to go back to their partner and to pursue opportunities for repair, things that they may not have even known that they had the opportunity to do. And if they do that repeatedly, as though it's an experiment, at some point, the door will either open and create new opportunities for improving the relationship, or they will get to the point where they go, you know what? I have tried as much as I reasonably can. And then their emotional readiness for divorce actually goes up and they're able to move in that direction.
Right. I think communication is key. So if I understand correctly, you're providing your clients with approaches or language that they can go to their partners to kind of unlock some of the problems in the relationship, which I think in many cases suffer from a lack or a breakdown in communication. And I think one of the greatest issues I've seen is letting things fester and not bringing up things that bother you with your partner in a language that comes across not as accusatory or insulting. Is that part of the work you're talking about?
Absolutely. And that's the cycle that a lot of guys get caught up in, is there have been things that are happening in the relationship that are not satisfying to them that they want to bring up, and maybe even potentially boundaries that they want to establish. But every time they try to have that conversation with their spouse, it goes sideways. Yeah. It blows up. It turns into an argument. Somehow they leave feeling like they're the bad guy when they were the one that was trying to express their hurt. And it's in untangling those dynamics that there's oftentimes a great opportunity. And many men, this is again my own kind of subjective opinion here, would do well to just put a pin in what it is that they're wanting to discuss with their partner and to start with really understanding where their partner's at. Because their partner does not want to be critical. Their partner does not want to be defensive. Their partner does not want to be judgmental towards them on a daily basis. And so starting to ask some questions and inviting in some curiosity of what might be going on for my partner, that she continues to end up in this state and respond in this way. And I find that as men are able to now get curious and simmer and create some emotional safety for their partner, and to communicate that they understand where their partner's at and what they're going through, it will create space for them to eventually share where they're at. But many men are wanting to be understood before they understand their partner. And that's a dynamic that people will get locked into and never really be able to get out of.
That's such a fascinating point, is perhaps we could use our determination to solve a problem by first understanding what maybe the problem is for our significant other and arrive at a different way than perhaps we thought.
I mean, you just said it probably better than I could, but my belief is that relational leadership really starts with understanding what's really going on here, and then how might we move to get out of this problematic dynamic. It's not necessarily snapping your fingers and making everything suddenly better, but it's understanding even what the problem is in the first place. Because many people will get divorced never knowing truly what the problem is, just that they don't like the way that they feel when they're around this partner anymore, and they feel like they can never relax.
Yeah.
But that problem remains elusive, and that's a real shame, because then people will carry some worry into a future relationship that maybe the same thing will happen because they never understood what did happen.
Exactly. Yeah. And, I say on this podcast occasionally, I should say it a little bit more, is the Great Divorce Podcast, myself, we're not pro-divorce. And you're not pro-divorce. You're a child of divorce, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what our goal is here is to help people, and whether it's going through divorce or maybe catching them early and perhaps helping them find solutions to avoid it. But the ultimate goal is to work with people to help them become productive, positive, purposeful human beings, and to live a life that's fulfilling. Because the more people who are living fulfilling, purposeful, driven lives, the better it is for society as a whole.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, very early on in this process, I was naive and I had the opinion that every relationship can and should be saved. Mm-hmm. But I very quickly started meeting with people who such significant violations of trust had happened in the relationship that it was clear that there was no real opportunity for the relationship to come back from that. And in those cases, people did need to move in the direction of separation, but still, and especially when children are involved, it begs the question, how can we do this difficult thing with the minimum amount of damage, whether it's financial damage or emotional damage? Yeah.
No, that's terrific stuff. James, obviously this is the Gray Divorce Podcast, and our listenership tend to be people over the age of 50, going through or emerging from mid to late life divorce. And you probably know that the fastest growing group of people getting divorced is over 65. The baby boomers are bringing their acceptance of divorce into elderhood, or senior. I don't know what the proper term is, but I'm curious. As we wind down the conversation here, what have you noticed, if anything, with respect to specific issues involving people that you work with going through divorce later in life?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I might say that one of the things that I wish wasn't happening was individuals later in life still spending an arm and a leg on their divorce process when their divorce is arguably simpler. And simpler in terms of having perhaps grown children that are already out of the house, right? Where what's primarily being dealt with are the assets and the liabilities, right? Or maybe some spousal support between the two individuals there, but they're not talking about parenting schedules, child custody, and child support. And I'm seeing individuals later in life who could very well get through a very simple divorce that's primarily financial, getting tangled up with attorneys, allowing communication to break down, and then again spending upwards of $40,000 or $50,000, in my opinion, oftentimes unnecessarily, right, to get divorced. And it's a shame too, especially if they're already in retirement and there's no longer an opportunity for additional income and earning, that people are spending their hard-earned money unnecessarily. And so I think the role of financial professionals, right, especially to get in early and to help individuals come together around the preservation of their assets, becomes even more important later on.
Couldn't have said it better myself, James. James, thanks so much. This has been a great conversation. If any of our listeners would like to avail themselves of your services, how can they find you?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the best place to find me and to learn more about what I do is on my website, which is bestpossibledivorce.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I post content regularly there.
Terrific. James, thanks very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Gray Divorce Podcast. To learn more or get in contact with your host, you can visit Andrew's website at transcendretirement.net. Also, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Information provided is educational only and should not be construed as legal or tax advice. Each situation is unique and should be discussed with your tax or legal advisor prior to implementation. Andrew Hatherley is not an attorney and does not provide legal advice. Information provided is financial in nature. Advisory services offered through Hatherley Capital Management, LLC. Divorce financial analysis services offered through Wiser Divorce Solutions, an affiliated company.